Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to Wood by Wright 2. If you're new to this channel, this is where I like to put a lot more detailed information. In the past, I used to do build videos and I'd go into great depth in every step and talk through what I was thinking and why I was thinking that. And a lot of people really like that, but it doesn't do very well on YouTube, so this channel is all about that. If you just want to see a laid back, nice video with some nice music, you can go over to the main channel and watch how I build it there, where I just go through and let the music play. But here we're actually going to talk through what was I thinking? Why did I do it that way? How can you do it? And try and answer some of those questions. So if you do have any questions that I don't answer here, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I do try and get to all of those. Also, feel free to send me an email or a message on my website. So let's actually look at making this stand. Now, particularly, this stand was popularized by Andre Roubo in the 17th century, I believe it was. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I'm probably wrong on that. But this was part of his work, as he actually showed people how to make this out of a single piece of wood. It's kind of ingenious. Then Roy Underhill came along and he started the WoodWright Shop, a show on PBS, and he's also the author of several books. Calvin Cobb is a fiction book he wrote, and it fits well on the stand here. But he showed this in his show, and it really kind of took off. A lot of people started making them. This has become kind of a staple. Now, back in the day, as it is now, this is actually a great project for learning how to do things. You have to do chisel work, you have to do precise sawing, you have to do resawing, you have to do shaping. There's always some details, some fret work. There's a lot of things that go into this and a lot of different skills that you have to have that you can learn on this. And this is a great project for that because it doesn't have to be perfect. And a lot of them over the years really aren't perfect at all. Like this one was done green, and so it's dried and warped. But you can tell that the person who did this had a little bit of fun playing along with it. Was it perfect? No, they actually did a pretty crummy job of it. But it still works, and it's still a functional piece, and it looks kind of cool. And so it's something that just about anyone can do. But that's enough of me talking. Let's actually get into how do we make this thing. For this, I chose a scrap of box elder, and this is kind of a cool piece of wood. It's a maple, it's a very soft maple, very easy to work with hand tools, though it tends to be a little bit twisted. I actually picked this piece up from Matt Cremona a while ago, and I've been wanting to do something with it and found this would be a great use for it. It's about 1 inch thick, and that's what you're looking for. You need something around 1 inch thick so that your two panels will end up being about 3/8 of an inch thick. I'm going to cut it to about 14 inches long and then something around 6 inches wide, but the width really doesn't matter that much. It's 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches, whatever you feel like. So I'm ended up just basically starting to make a board. I cut it to the approximate length I wanted, and then I want to start making a reference face. So I'm going to actually plane one side down with a scrub plane, make sure that it is twist free, clean it all up, smooth it out, and get one side perfectly flat and clean that I can reference everything off of. If you want to see more, I have several videos on dimensioning lumber, and so you can just search for Wood by Wright, how to dimension lumber, and you will come across that. Once I have that done, then I can smooth out a second edge, and so I have a face and an edge that I know are true, and I can measure everything else off of those. And I want to make sure that it is square to the face that I set up earlier. Now that I have one edge that is true, I can use the panel gauge to mark a line that I can then cut down to make it its final width. In this case, it's about 6 inches wide. I don't know what it is, I just made it as wide as I could out of that particular piece of wood. So now that I have that edge cleaned up, I can smooth it down and get it ready. A nice smoothing plane was very useful on this because the grain was a bit wild. Particularly with box elder, the grain tends to go in a lot of different directions. The next thing I want to do is actually measure it to thickness, and so I found the thinnest point of the board, set my marking gauge to that, and then put a line all the way around the board. Then all I have to do is get a plane and scrub it and plane it down to that line all the way around the edge of the board. And if I do that right, then theoretically this side should be perfectly flat because it's referenced off the other side. The next thing I want to do is start laying out the hinge, and so I measured up 5.5 inches and drew a line. So once I knew where that hinge was, I could build everything else off of that. Before I cut the hinge, I wanted to do the detail on the bottom, and so I made this little Cupid's bow, or OG. There's a bunch of different terms and different things here. Just have a little bit of fun. I used some circles to draw out what I was shaping, and just play with it. There is no right or wrong on that. Now that we have that done, we can start focusing on cutting the hinge. I have that line that I cut across there at somewhere around 5.5 inches up. It really doesn't matter where that is. And then I want to put 2 lines on either side of that center line. Those 2 lines need to be the thickness of the board apart. So half the thickness of the board is how far away from that first line you put. Then I'm going to use the dividers to step off marks. I want to put 4 points across, so they'll end up being 5 divisions here. And that way there's an odd number for the hinge. You need that odd number. 4, it just looks odd. Then I want to drill a hole through at one point on each of those lines at the intersection there. I cut a hacksaw and have it so that the teeth are pulling, and I could push it into that hole and pull out a little bit, and push it into the hole and pull out a little bit until I worked most of the way through. And then I could flip the board around and work at it from the other side, and just poking it in that hole and pulling back out actually goes pretty quickly. You just need to be a little bit patient and take your time, making sure you don't scratch up the wood too much. And I'm just opening it up enough until I can get my keyhole saw in there. Once I can get the keyhole saw in there, everything becomes a lot easier. So I'm just working at one side and then working at the other side until it's big enough for the keyhole saw. Then I can pull the hacksaw blade out and slide in the keyhole saw. If you've ever seen a saw like this before, I find them at Midwest Tool Collector meets and some of the antique places. It used to be very common, but they're not as common anymore. Some drywall saws still have it where you can replace the blade, but most of the time they don't. Then we can just go from that hole we cut straight down to the second line. And this is the beginning of the hinge. These are where they're all going to split off. The next thing we need to do is cut this beast in half. And so I set up a marking gauge line, and I didn't put it right on the center of the board. I actually had it slightly off center so that I could line from one side of the board and then line from the other side of the board. It gives me 2 lines that are close together. Excuse me, before we start ripping this down, we need to actually slice out the rest of the hinge. And so I was about to start sawing it, and then I realized, no, you've got to actually cut out the hinge first. So I'm going to chop down along the line on every other side, and then pare out. Now, Roy Underhill likes to make these round. I actually prefer them to be at 45 degrees. I like the look of that. When it opens up, it's nice and flat on the bottom, and I like the look of 45 degrees, but round is what he likes as well. I'm also going to be using my carving chisel, which has a very fine blade to do most of the fine work. You can see how it's every other on each side so that the panels go all the way across. If you don't quite understand that, I would say go watch Roy Underhill's video. He actually goes into that a good bit and spends a good chunk of time on it. Next thing we need to do is the resawing, and this really scares a lot of people, and I don't really know why. Once you get used to using a saw, as long as you aren't forcing the saw and pushing it, it does the work for you. It just takes a little bit longer to go through something thick. I like to cut down a ways on one side and then rotate around and cut down on the other side, and that way I'm always looking at the line that I'm cutting on. And I just want to cut it down until it just touches the hinge. Now for the other side, it's a lot larger piece to cut down, a lot longer distance, and so I'm going to pull out my Roubo frame saw. And I love working with the saw. It just makes everything so much more fun. It's a beautiful saw to work with and extremely enjoyable. Every chance I get to play with it, I pull it out. And it made very quick work of resawing this. It literally only took me 2 or 3 minutes to cut this down. And that was even with moving the camera around. So if I wasn't moving the camera around, I could probably do it in a minute and a half, if that. And now we're getting close to the point where it's almost opening up. And so I need to figure out what's still catching, and I'm going to look at it. And some places I might need to saw down a little bit farther. Some places I might need to chop down a little bit farther. The chopping should go halfway to the saw mark. And so it's better to leave them alone and then bring them back to where they need to be. And there we have a functioning hinge, and that's a lot of fun. You can see how the 45 degree leaves that half flat point in the middle that I like. Now we want to cut off one of these lips so that it will sit flat. Now with Andre Roubo, he has a different method of actually making 2 of these at a time. And I might do that some other time in the future, but it's just quicker and easier to cut off that excess. Now we want to plane off the surfaces, and you just have to be careful with where the grain of the wood is going. I like using a shoulder plane to flatten out the hinges inside, as well as getting up really close to the hinge on the main panels. Once I get that, as here you can see I'm running up against the hinge, then I can bring in the plane and go across the grain and clean up nice and smooth. I'm not worrying about getting it perfectly smooth, I just want to get it to relatively flat. We're going to smooth it out later. So there's the basic shape. From here on out, things are just adding detail and whatever you want. This is a chance where you can kind of experiment, play with different things. Do you want to learn fret saw? Do you want to learn carving? Do you want to learn shaping? And I wanted to do a little bit of carving on this, and I wanted to do a little bit of work on it, but I didn't want to do much more fret saw. I just don't enjoy that as much. So for the carving, I go online and I find a pattern that I like. I print it out to the size I want, and I can size it in paint. And then I glue it down with a kid's glue stick. Some people really don't like this method, and I actually really do. It holds it in place and keeps it so it's no problem at all. And then when I'm done, I can get a card scraper and scrape off the pattern. It goes really easily, and I really enjoy it. I've tried a whole bunch of different methods and different transfer things, but this is the one that I really like. So give it a try. If not, everyone's different. Everyone likes something different. So once I have this outlined, I scraped it off, and I was just going to leave it there, but I thought, you know what, I actually want to do some relief in this and remove 3 sections so that light comes through. So I'm going to drill out 3 holes, 1, 2, 3, where I'm removing those sections, and I actually want to texture the sections in between. So for texturing these sections in between, I'm just going to get a skewed chisel. That allows me to get into these corners and flatten these out a little bit lower. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave them smooth or actually texture them. And I hadn't decided at this point, so I started working on the fretwork. Now that I had those holes drilled through, I could use the fret saw to clean them all out and get them to the shape of the carving inside. This actually goes really quickly, as box elder is very easy to cut, and with it only being about 3/8 inch thick, it cuts pretty easily. I also decided to cut these at 45. I was thinking about doing another OG, but I think with the Celtic look, I like the 45 on there. This just wasn't standing out enough, so I decided to flare it. I used a small gouge to just go around and push in all of these little flutes around. And then I can use a carving knife to clean them out and get a nice sharp edge between those flutes and the carving surface. This is actually something I really enjoy doing because it just makes the carving pop, and it goes so quickly. See how you just march through these all the way around and then come in with a knife, clean them out, and you've got this really nice crisp edge that makes the carving pop out. I decided to actually texture the inside rather than smoothing them out, so I got a leather punch that actually is designed for texturing leather, and I put it in there and played with a few different things that I liked, and I found that I liked this pattern. It just brought everything the way I wanted it. You never know what you're going to do until you experiment and play with it. There is no right or wrong. It's one of the fun things about this sport. Next thing is all of these smoothing work, and I'm going to get out the smoothing plane and the block plane, add light chamfers to everything, clean it all up. We need to do some file work on what was hit with the fret saw. So I have a very fine file, and I have to be careful here. You can see how the board is bending, and I'm really not putting that much pressure on it. So you just have to be careful not to push too hard. Just work at it the way it needs to be, smooth it down, and files actually do a really quick work of this. Then I'll use the file to add a little bit of a chamfer to all of these rounded edges, and that makes it match up with what I was doing with the block plane. Also need to clean out what I used on the fret saw, so I use a couple different smaller files and get in there to clean it all out. And at this point, everything's really getting exciting. I'm going to use a card scraper to clean this out, scrape it down, and smooth it out. This really does quick work and gets you through all of that cross-grain cutout you had earlier. Such a fun tool to play.
Wood by Wright card scrapers now available on the website. I'll leave a link down below. Thanks for helping the channel.
Then for finish, of course, this is Wood by Wright, so we're going to use boiled linseed oil and paste wax. The maple doesn't actually absorb a whole lot. It does on the end grain, but it mostly sits on the wood. So I end up putting a coat on there, wait 15 minutes, put another coat on there. Then I'll wipe off the excess and go straight into the paste wax. Put the paste wax on, let it cure for about 30-40 minutes, and then wipe off the excess, buff it down, and you've got your finished product. And I'm really happy with how this came out. Just a lot of fun. I'm going to have to make a few more of these in the future. Pretty.
So there you go. I hope you like this project. This is a fun one for me and one I've been wanting to do for years. Finally got around to doing it. I kind of like it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. If you did, please let me know down below. I'd love to hear that. Is there something particular you'd like to see? I do read through the comments and I get a lot of my ideas from that. Also, if you want to contact me directly, you can do that on my website, woodbywright.com. There's a contact form on there, and I'm looking forward to showing this off. If you want to find out more information, I will leave a link link to Roy Underhill's video where he makes one, as well as you'll find connections to the tools that I have and some of the things I've used. You can find that down in the description below. So I hope you like that. This is a fun one for me. And until next time, have a wonderful day. So I made this as a book stand, but my daughter thinks that it's a doll chair.